I was in the hall the day we banned Earth, and I raised my own limb to do it, so what follows is not testimony from the outside. It is a confession from the chair. I am Saravane Talk, third-seat recorder of the High Concord of settled stars, and it is my office to keep the account plain. I have kept it plain for 240 of your years. I have recorded famines and ascensions, the folding of dead treaties and the birth of live ones, and never once did the ledger frighten me. It frightens me now, not because the entries are false, because they are true, and because I could have read what they meant 11 years ago and did not. Let me set down the morning of the vote as it was, without the softening that hindsight would like to add. The Concord Hall is a ring of tiered galleries around a black glass floor, and the light comes up from beneath that floor so that every delegation sits half in shadow, faces lit from below. It is an old arrangement meant to make speakers feel weighed. On the day in question, the galleries were near full. The great powers held the high tiers, the Vaunt, whose ships map the drift lanes, the Os, who hold the grain worlds, the Coilbound, who lend it interest to half the settled stars. Below them, the middle powers. Below those, in the lowest and least lit ring, the client species and the minor seats, the Ashkin who dig, the Aru who ferry, the Velisk, whose whole world had been a mining lease for 6 generations, the Sethant, my own neighbors, who repair what others break and are thanked by no one. Earth had held a minor seat for 40 years, a young seat, a seat we had granted the way one grants a child a place at the low end of the table to teach it manners and to watch it. The charge against Earth was not war. I want that understood, because later accounts made it sound as though humanity had done something violent and been justly cast out. They had not. The charge was destabilization by unsanctioned covenant. In plainer speech, humans kept making agreements they were not authorized to make. They signed water rights with the Ashkin without routing it through the Os. They lent a repair fleet to the Sethant at no interest, which the Coilbound took as an insult to the whole institution of interest. They stood up in the low ring and spoke to the minor seats as though the minor seats were peers, and when the Vaunt reminded them of the tiers, the human envoy had said, I have the words exactly. They are entry 19,844. We heard you. We just don't agree that some seats are worth less than others. That was the true crime, not violence, disagreement with the shape of the table. The Vaunt speaker, high in the first tier, moved the ban. She was elegant about it. She did not rage. She said that the Concord was a mechanism of order, that order required tiers, that a member which would not respect tiers was not a member but a solvent, and that a solvent, however small, must be removed before it dissolved the whole. She proposed full expulsion. Earth's seat struck. Earth's ships barred from the drift lanes the Vaunt administered. Earth's trade rerouted so that nothing came to Earth except through a great power's hand and toll. It passed easily. I recorded the tally of the great and middle powers, all but 2 in favor. The minor seats, the low ring, abstained or opposed, but the low ring's votes are weighted at 1/10, and 1/10 of nothing is nothing. I raised my limb with the majority. I told myself it was procedure. Order is order. A solvent must be removed. Here is the part I returned to. When the tally closed and the ban was law, the human envoy rose. Her name was Raise. She was a small creature by our measure, dark-eyed, gray coming into the fur atop her head, and she had sat through the whole proceeding without once raising her voice. The Vaunt speaker, I think, expected a plea. That is what the low ring did when the high ring struck them. They pleaded, they bargained, they offered to be smaller. It is the correct behavior for the weak, and it is satisfying to grant or refuse. Raise did not plead. She gathered her few papers. She looked not at the high tiers who had cast her out, but down at the lowest ring, at the Ashkin and the Oru and the Velisk and my own Sethant neighbors, the seats worth 1/10. And she said to them, not to us. The offer stands. It always stood. When you're tired of the toll, you know where we are. Then she left. No ceremony. She simply walked up the aisle and out of the hall, and the door closed behind her with the small sound that door has always made. The high tiers were pleased. I recorded the mood as settled. The coilbound lender beside me made a sound of satisfaction and said that the solvent was flushed and the vessel was whole. I agreed with him. I wrote the vessel is whole in the account, and I underlined it, because I thought it was the sentence the day would be remembered for. It was, just not the way I meant. I did not think about Ray's last words for a long time. There was no reason to. She had spoken to nobodies. The offer, whatever it was, had been made to seats worth a tenth. What could a tenth do? The first entry that should have troubled me came 14 months later, and it was so small I nearly did not log it. The Velisk withdrew from their mining lease. You must understand what that was. The Velisk had been a mining lease for 6 generations. Their world, their labor, their whole seat in the Concord existed as a lease held by the As, the grain power, who had bought the mineral rights before the Velisk had a written language, and had renewed the lease across 200 years, by the simple method of controlling every ship that could carry Velisk ore off Velisk soil. The lease was not slavery. We had a word for it that was not slavery. But the Velisk had never once in 6 generations been able to leave it, because leaving required ships and ships required the lanes, and the lanes were the vaunts, and the vaunt did not fly for the poor. Now the Velisk gave notice. They cited a clause everyone had forgotten, a clause that let them buy out the lease at fair market value in a single payment. Everyone had forgotten it because no minor seat had ever had a single payment's worth of anything. The As delegate laughed in the hall and demanded to know where a mining lease had found a fortune. The Velisk answered that the fortune was not theirs, it was lent, at no interest, by Earth. The coilbound went very still at that. No interest. It is a phrase that means nothing to your kind and a scream to theirs, but even then we did not see it. We saw one loan, one clever transaction, the As. Delegate was annoyed to lose a lease but not alarmed, one world of ore, in a galaxy of ore. I recorded the withdrawal and moved on. Then the Ashkin reflagged their haulers. Then the Aru opened a lane. I will slow here, because the opening of the lane is the moment the ledger turns, and I did not read it at the time. The Aru are farriers, small ships, short hops, the local traffic that the Vaunt does not deign to run because there is no profit in carrying grain between 2 poor moons. For all of Concord history, the Aru had flown the Vaunt's lanes under the Vaunt's toll, because the Vaunt owned the drift maps, the charts of the safe corridors through the tearing currents between stars, and no one flew a corridor they could not chart. Humanity gave the Aru a chart. Not the Vaunt's chart, a new one. Earth's astronomers, barred from the Vaunt's lanes by our own ban, had spent the 14 months since the vote doing the one thing we had not forbidden because we had not imagined they could. They had mapped their own corridors, slower ones, uglier ones, corridors the Vaunt had surveyed centuries ago and discarded as commercially worthless because they added days to a crossing. Humans did not care about the days. They cared that the corridors were unowned. And when they had the charts, they did not sell them. They gave them. To the Aru first, then to the Ashkin, then to any minor seat that asked. Free passage on a map no great power controlled. Do you see what that is? I did not then. I recorded it as Earth publishes redundant navigation data. Redundant. The Vaunt's charts were faster. Who would take the slow road? The poor would. The poor would take the slow road gladly, because the slow road was free, and the fast road had a toll they could never stop paying. Within 2 years the low ring was moving grain and ore and repair fleets along human corridors, paying no toll to anyone, and the Vaunt's lane revenue from the minor seats had fallen by a third. The Vaunt raised the matter in the hall. The speaker was no longer elegant. She demanded that the Concord bar the human charts as it had barred Earth's ships, and here the Concord met the first hard edge of what it had built. It could not bar the charts. The ban had cut Earth out of the Concord's authority. Earth was no longer a member. It was no longer subject to Concord law. The very completeness of our expulsion meant we had no standing to command it. We had thrown the solvent out of the vessel, and now the solvent was on the outside of the glass, and the glass was between us and it kept doing exactly as it pleased. I recorded the Vaunt's motion as failed for want of jurisdiction, and I felt, for the first time, a small cold thing move in me. Not fear yet, the ancestor of fear. The Empire, I use the word your title uses, though humans never once used it of themselves. The Empire did not announce itself. It had no capital for a long time, no flag, no throne. It had a ring station. Harroven, a derelict transferring at the edge of the drift, a place the great powers had abandoned as unprofitable a century before. Humans took it, it was unowned, like everything they took, and they did not fortify it. They repaired it. They ran power to the dark modules and air to the dead ones, and they hung a sign at the docking throat, and the sign, when the Sethant repair crews who were the first to read it brought back the recording, said only this: all welcome. No tears. The Sethant went. My own neighbors, the seat worth a tenth, the menders that no one thanked. They had a grievance old as my career. The great powers used Sethant labor to repair their fleets and paid in scrip redeemable only at great power ports, so that a Sethant crew could work a lifetime and never accumulate anything they could spend at home. Humanity, at Harroven, paid in goods and passage and the free charts, and asked in return only that the Sethant do at Harroven what they did everywhere, mend what was broken and be thanked for it. Raise herself, I am told, met the first Sethant crew at the docking throat and said the words, thanked them by name. That is not a policy. It has no line in any treaty, and it did more damage to the conquered than a war fleet. Because word travels in the low ring, word travels along the free corridors on the untold ships carried by farriers who owe no one. Within a year Harroven was not a derelict. It was a market, a shipyard, a parliament of nobodies. The Velisk brought ore they no longer owed to anyone. The Ashkin brought labor they were paid honestly for. The Oru brought everything everywhere along their free lanes. And humanity sat in the middle of it, not as a master. This is the part the conquered could never make itself believe, not as a master, but as the keeper of a single promise, made in the hall on the day of the ban and kept every day since. You are not alone, and the seats are not worth different amounts. I flew to Harroven myself in the 6th year. I told the conquered it was a recorder's duty to see the thing I was recording. That was true. It was also that I could no longer read the entries from my chair and believe them, and I had to know whether the ledger lied. The ledger did not lie. I came in along a human corridor, a recorder of the conquered that had banned them, and no one stopped me, because the charts were free and the docking throat was open, and the sign said all welcome, and it meant it. I walked the ring. I have walked the high tiers of the conquered hall for 200 years, and I tell you the ring at Harroven had more life in one of its market spans than the whole hall in session. Sethant crews and Velisk miners and Oru pilots and a dozen minor species I had only ever seen as abstentions in a tally, all of them moving with the particular ease of creatures who are not, for once, being weighed. No one there sat half in shadow, lit from below to feel small. The station lit its people evenly. I noticed that. I am a recorder, I notice light. They had built a place with no low ring. I found a human overseer, not Ray's, a younger one, a man with a work-scarred hand, at a repair dock, and I asked him the question I had carried from my chair. I asked him what the trick was, what humanity took. Because everything in the conquered is a transaction, everything has a toll and a tier and a hand that skims, and I could not believe that a thing this large had been built on giving charts away for free and thanking menders by name. I asked him where the toll was hidden. He did not understand the question at first. When he did, he laughed not cruelly. He said, and I recorded it, entry 41,180, "There's no trick. We told people we'd keep our word and then we kept it. Turns out that's rare enough to build on." Then he went back to his work, because a ferry was waiting, and he had said he'd have it flying by the shift's end. I stood on that ring a long time. I understood at last what the conquered had filed under the wrong heading for 11 years. We had a word for humans in the account. We had many: solvent, destabilizing, unauthorized. We had studied their strength, which was ordinary, and their numbers, which were small, and their weapons, which were unremarkable, and we had concluded that a species so unexceptional could be safely cast out into the dark to weaken and die, because that is what the low ring does when the tears are taken from beneath it. It withers. Every minor seat in Concord history that lost its standing had withered. We had not filed the one trait that mattered, because it did not look like a weapon and it could not be measured on any instrument we owned. A human keeps his word. Not to the strong. Anyone keeps faith with the strong. Faith with the strong is only fear wearing a better coat. A human keeps his word to the weak, to the seat worth a tenth, to the mender no one thanks, to the mining lease that has been a lease for 6 generations. And he keeps it when there is no profit in keeping it, and no punishment for breaking it, and no one powerful watching to see whether he does. And a kept word given to enough of the abandoned does not stay a word. It compounds. It becomes trust, and trust becomes passage, and passage becomes trade, and trade becomes a ring full of light with no low tier in it, and the ring becomes your word and empire, built not from what humanity took but from what it refused to take. The toll, the tier, the skim, the small daily cruelty that the conquered had mistaken for the very definition of order. We thought we had flushed a solvent. We had taken the one species that would not weigh a seat by its worth, and we had thrown it, whole and undivided, into the exact place where every unweighed, undervalued, abandoned seat already lived, and we had told it to make its own way. We did not isolate humanity. There is no other word for what we did but concentrate it. We poured the solvent into the vessel of the poor and sealed the lid, and were surprised when the whole of it dissolved. By the 9th year the arithmetic was past argument. More trade moved on free human corridors than on vaunt lanes. The coilbound's interest, the engine of the great powers, cannot function where a rival lends at nothing. Loan by loan the low ring paid off the coilbound and never borrowed again, and a lender with no debtors is only a hall full of empty ledgers. The As. Grain worlds found their leases lapsing one by one as the lease peoples bought themselves free, with fortunes lent at no interest and repaid in loyalty. The Vaunt, who had banned Earth's ships from her lanes, watched her lanes empty while a slower, uglier, unowned map carried the galaxy's poor wherever they wished to go free. The Conquered met to discuss readmitting Earth in the 10th year. I recorded that session, and I will not pretend it was dignified. The Vaunt speaker, who had moved the ban with such elegance, moved now that Earth be invited back to its seat, the low seat, the young seat, the 10th weight seat at the dim end of the table. There was, even then, no understanding in the motion. They still thought the seat was a prize. They still thought a tier at the Concord's table was worth more than a place at Harrowven's evenly lit ring, where no seat was weighed at all. Earth declined. Ray's was old by then. It was the young overseer with the scarred hand who carried the answer to the hall, and he stood in the low ring where his people had once been told they were worth a tenth, and he did not gloat, because that is not the trait. I have watched them for 11 years, and I tell you gloating is not in it. The trait is quieter and far worse for us than gloating. He simply declined. He thanked the Conquered for the offer. And then he said the thing I have put at the head of this account, the thing I should have understood on the first day when Ray's said its first half to the low ring and walked out. You didn't ban us from anything. You just told everyone who mattered where the door was. They've been walking through it for 11 years. The seat's yours. We don't grade people by their seats. Then he left, the way she had left, and the door made its small sound. I am filing this as a finding of the recorder, and findings are supposed to end in a recommendation. Here is mine, and it is the last useful thing I will set in the account, because a body that will not hear it will not be a body much longer. We did not lose to a fleet. No human fleet ever came. We lost to a kept promise, made to the seats we had taught ourselves to despise, and kept past all reason and profit until it outgrew us. The great powers still hold the high tiers. The high tiers still light their speakers from below to make them feel weighed. And every year there are fewer speakers to weigh, because the weighed have found a place that does not weigh them, and they have gone, and they are not coming back. I raised my own limb for the band. I wrote the vessel is whole and I underlined it. I would give the 200 years of my recordership to strike that line. But the account must be plain, so I leave it, and beneath it I write the truer sentence, the one the ledger meant all along and I was 11 years too late to read. The solvent was never the danger. The danger was that we handed it whole to everyone we had wronged and told it to keep its word. It did.